It feels like, like a seismic shift is happening. For companies using VMware for their IT, it's like their virtual world is experiencing a major tectonic shift.
Oh, absolutely. This Broadcom acquisition of VMware,
Hmm.
it's not just some financial deal. It's causing a lot of IT leaders to really rethink things, like their whole infrastructure,
Yeah.
what it's going to look like going forward.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're going to really dive into today, like why so many VMware customers are actually looking at alternatives. And to guide this deep dive, we've got this Market Pulse survey. It's got insights from over 560 IT leaders. And these are from big companies, right? Over 1,000 employees all across the US and Europe. It paints a pretty good picture, I think, of what's happening.
Yes, it does. This survey was pretty recently, June and July this year, and it throws up some really interesting data points.
Yeah.
We'll look at how customer satisfaction has taken a dip, the cost increases, why they're looking for other options, the challenges of actually making the switch, and finally, the alternatives themselves. What are they looking at?
So it doesn't matter if you're the one making these big IT decisions or if you're just interested in how the tech world is changing. This deep dive should give you a really good idea of, what's going on and why it's important. So let's get into it. Let's start with how VMware customers are feeling right now.
What's really interesting is the drop in customer satisfaction. The survey shows that 63% of organizations are less satisfied with VMware now since Broadcom took over. And that's a big change.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just like a little complaint here and there. This could be a real loss of trust in a platform that so many companies rely on for, their core IT stuff. This kind of dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
It can make people switch away faster than just costs alone.
It really is. And it's not just a general feeling that things are worse. It's the really satisfied customers who are feeling it the most. Before the acquisition, it was 61% of VMware customers, they gave their satisfaction an 8 or 9 out of 9, the top rating,
Yeah.
But now it's only 45%. That's a lot of happy customers who are now, not so happy.
Exactly. It makes you think that the changes after the acquisition are having a real impact, a negative one, on how customers see the value of VMware. And this drop in how happy they are, it's tied to another big worry, costs.
Oh, yeah. Costs. Always a big issue in IT. The survey says there's going to be an average cost increase, like a multiplier of 1.47. But for those of us who don't speak, multiplier, what does that actually mean for budgets?
Well, look at the companies spending over $500,000 a year on VMware. That's 59% of them. With this 1.47 multiplier, they're probably looking at more than $735,000 per year. If they don't change how much they're using, that's a big jump in costs. The CFOs are going to notice that for sure.
No doubt. Any company would have to think twice about that kind of increase. It's not surprising, then, that with less satisfaction and these cost worries, people are looking at other options, seriously looking.
The survey shows that really clearly. 56% of companies think they'll use less VMware in the next 12 months. And then you've got another 28% who just aren't sure yet. But the fact that they're even thinking about reducing it, that says a lot.
So we could be looking at over 80% of VMware customers either cutting back or thinking about it. That's huge. It's a potential market shift. What are the main things making them consider these other options?
Well, the IT leaders in the survey said a few things. First, they're worried about needing new tools for management and having to train their teams to use them. Then there's migrating servers and data. That's always complex, moving all that important stuff from one platform to another. And the last thing, finding staff who already know how to use these new platforms.
Those are big challenges. It's not just swapping one program for another. It might mean retraining everyone in IT, changing your whole system, and dealing with the risks of moving important data. So where are these companies looking when they want to move away from VMware? What alternatives are they considering?
It's really interesting. Of those looking at other options, 71% are looking at solutions they can run in their own data centers. So even though the climb is a big deal, a lot of companies still want that control, keeping some things in-house.
Makes sense. So what are the names that keep coming up? Which platforms are they looking at the most?
This survey breaks down. The most popular is Hyper-V or Azure Stack HCI. 25% of those considering alternatives are looking at that Microsoft world. Hyper-V is Microsoft's virtualization tech, and it often makes sense for companies already using a lot of Microsoft stuff. Then there's cloud-hosted IaaS on AWS. That's 24% IaaS. That's infrastructure stuff like virtual machines and storage, but you rent it from companies like Amazon Web Services. And there's Oracle Linux virtualization at 21%, and Red Hat virtualization and cloud-hosted IaaS on Azure.
That's a pretty diverse mix. It seems like customers aren't all going for one VMware killer. They're looking at lots of different options, depending on what they already have, their cloud strategy, and maybe just which vendors they're comfortable with. Now, for those actually planning to use less VMware, how fast are they moving? What's the timeline for these migrations?
It seems like a lot of them aren't waiting around. A good chunk of those reducing their VMware use, they're going to start moving virtual machines when their current contracts run out. Specifically, 36% are going to start in the next 6 months, and another 29% in the 6 to 12 months after that. So 65% are going to start these big changes within a year.
That's pretty fast for such a fundamental change. Where are they moving to? Is it all to the cloud, or are they sticking with their own data centers?
It's actually pretty balanced. Of those planning migrations, 39% are moving some VMs to other hypervisors in their own data centers, and 36% are moving some to the cloud. It shows that companies are thinking about a hybrid approach, using both what they have and the cloud's flexibility.
Makes sense. So we know why they might move, and we know where they might go, but actually moving maybe hundreds or thousands of virtual machines? That sounds really hard. What are the biggest challenges they expect?
You're right, it's a big job. The survey mentions a few main concerns. Like we talked about earlier, they're worried about learning new management tools and using staff time for the migration. And then there's not having enough people who already know the new platforms. And of course, managing the budget for such a big IT project is always a worry.
It's not just about stuff inside the company, is it? The survey talks about how this might affect their partnerships with tech companies.
Yes, that's a really important point. 29% of VMware customers said their VMware partner isn't a Broadcom partner and won't be. So now these companies might have to find new partners for support and expertise during this transition.
That just adds another layer of complication to an already complicated situation. You're not just dealing with new technology. You might also be building completely new relationships with vendors at the same time. And then there's managing a more diverse IT setup. That sounds hard.
Yeah, definitely. The IT leaders in the survey were worried about how much harder it would be to manage lots of different hypervisors and maybe different cloud environments compared to their simpler VMware setup. That added complexity and how it affects their ability to manage their virtual resources efficiently. It's a big worry for many.
And we can't forget about the people involved. We mentioned staffing, but the survey really goes into how this could affect the IT teams who will be doing these migrations.
The staffing side of things is significant. The survey found that 89% of companies think they'll need at least one full-time engineer just for this new virtual machine strategy. If we break that down, 25% think they'll need one full-time engineer, 28% think they'll need more than one, 21% say two, and 15% say more than two. So that's a lot of people and resources.
That's a serious amount of manpower. And if you think about how many virtual machines these companies have, the estimated time for each migration shows how big this is.
Yeah, the average estimate they gave was 62 minutes per virtual machine. To move it to another platform, that's just over an hour. It doesn't sound like much for one VM, but multiply that by hundreds or even thousands. It could take months or even a year or more for the biggest companies.
Absolutely. So with all these challenges, how are these IT leaders actually planning to move their important workloads? I know the survey talks about different migration options.
Yeah, there are 4 main approaches they're considering, and they could choose up to 2. The first one is using a tool from the company that makes the new hypervisor they want to use. But the survey says these tools have limitations. They often only work with that one platform, and they're usually one way. So if something goes wrong during the migration, you might not be able to go back easily.
That makes sense. You're basically committing to the new platform without an easy way back. So what's the second option?
The second one is using a specialized migration tool from a third party. These tools are made by companies or consultants who really know infrastructure and cloud migration. The important thing here, the survey says, is making sure the tool works with both your current VMware setup and the new hypervisors or cloud hosts you're moving to. It needs to work with the operating systems and applications running on the VMs too. These tools give you more flexibility, but you need to check them carefully to make sure they're compatible and secure.
So more flexibility, but you have to do your homework. What about option number 3? I thought that one sounded easier at first.
That's the one where you basically start fresh. You create new virtual servers on the new platform and just move the data. It might sound simple, especially for things like database servers or file shares, but the survey says there's more to it than that. You still have to deal with user permissions, database connections, and making sure the data isn't corrupted during the move. It can actually be more complicated and risky than it seems at first.
Sounds like a lot of little details that could go wrong if you're not careful. And the last option is something most IT departments already use, backups.
Right. The fourth option is using your current backup system to restore backups directly to the new platform. The survey highlights how useful backups can be here. A lot of modern backup platforms are made to work with different vendors and hybrid cloud environments. They can handle the differences in hardware and drivers between platforms, and some even have automation features that can make the whole migration much smoother. It's something you probably already have and understand, so there's less of a learning curve. But you do need to plan the restore carefully, especially if you're moving a lot of data.
That makes a lot of sense. If you have a good backup, you can restore it to different places. That gives you a lot of flexibility. The survey even lists some benefits of using backups for these transitions.
Yeah, it does. It says that modern backup solutions, the ones that are aware of virtualization, can back up entire virtual machines right from the hypervisor. You don't need to install agents in each VM, and that makes them much more portable. Then there's the support for offsite and cloud backups. That's important for redundancy and disaster recovery. And most backup solutions have automation and scheduling, which makes things easier. They're also designed to be efficient with bandwidth. And they can scale up as your virtual infrastructure grows, so they're good for big companies.
So even with a good backup system, you still need to plan and do the work. But it sounds like it can make things a lot easier and less risky than doing everything manually or with a vendor-specific tool. So as we wrap up our overview of this whole situation, what are the most important things our listeners should be thinking about, especially if they might be facing these VMware changes themselves?
The biggest question is, are you really willing to accept the changes VMware is making with their pricing and everything else under Broadcom? You need to have an honest discussion about this. With IT leaders and the other people in the company, don't just see this as a problem. See it as a chance to really rethink your whole strategy for hypervisors and the cloud. Don't just stick with what you're doing. Look at all the alternatives we talked about. You need to know how much time and how many people you'll need for any platform change and figure out where you'll get those people. Will you train your current staff? Or hire new people? And really importantly, look at your current backup solution. Can it protect your cloud environments? Can it help you move to other platforms smoothly? If you don't have a good backup solution, now's the time to look at data protection solutions that can handle these migrations and protect your virtual machines on whatever new platform you choose.
Those are some really important points. So to sum up, it looks like Broadcom buying VMware has created a lot of uncertainty. And it's making a lot of customers think about and plan for switching to other hypervisors. The main reasons, they're not as happy with VMware anymore, and they think it's going to get a lot more expensive.
That's right. And while those average cost increases seem likely, every company needs to remember that the actual impact on their budget depends on their specific contracts and how much they use VMware. So you need to look at your own situation before you decide to switch platforms.
And it's good to see that IT leaders are being proactive. They're trying to find the best and cheapest way to handle this transition. They're getting the resources they need and basically creating new strategies for their infrastructure. There are a lot of other hypervisors out there and different tools, and modern backup solutions seem to be really helpful for this whole process.
Absolutely. This might be a time of big change and some challenges, but it's also a chance for companies to make their IT infrastructure better for the future. Maybe they'll become more agile and save money in the long run.
And on that note, here's something to think about. With all these changes in virtualization, how could using a mix of different hypervisors actually help your company? Could it make you more adaptable, more resilient, and more flexible in the future? It's something to consider as you navigate this new landscape.